Welcome to Lenten Conversations with Good Samaritan Church in Pinellas Park, Florida.
Well, Bill, thank you for so much for joining me for this Lenten conversation. All through this season of Lent, we're going to be having in-depth discussions about the 7 sayings that Jesus said from the cross. And for our discussion, we're going to be focusing on Jesus saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And we see this statement recorded in Matthew 27, verse 46, and also in Mark 15, verse 34. Both of these accounts allude to the fact that this statement was made in the 9th hour. Around 3 hours of darkness had happened at this point. And I find it amazing from these gospel accounts that Jesus even had the strength to make this statement in a loud voice, it says. One of the things that really stands out to me in this saying, though, is the word forsaken. And I'm wondering what that word means to you.
Well, it means just an emptiness, nothing, just a huge vacuum. And in that, and there's also a context or an overlay of probably incredible pain. Of course, I'm tying that into hanging on a cross for 9 hours, but just the incredible pain of a situation. Just, nothing. No, God's not there. Just alone, really alone.
When I was doing some research and thinking about this particular statement, one of the things that I found was the definition of forsaken being to abandon or to desert. One definition said it was to leave someone entirely, usually in a moment of need. And then I found one person, I was actually talking to one of the chaplains at work and about this, and they said that they actually feel like a good definition is to turn your back on someone. So I was thinking about that as Jesus is on the cross. He's been going through this terrible pain for all this time. And to get this picture of God turning God's back to Jesus at that moment, it makes it so heartbreaking almost to think about what Jesus was going through, not just physically, but emotionally at that point, to feel so alone. With those definitions, though, and thinking about those different things about the word forsaken, has there ever been a time in your life where you have felt forsaken by God? And what that was, can you tell us what that was like?
I've really thought about that, and I guess maybe because of the depth of what Jesus was going through on the cross, I cannot remember a time where I was in that kind of a sense of abandonment, especially by God. And I could say, well, yeah, and it's true that I've had a very blessed life so far, not to have experienced that kind of cut off, that kind of turning God's back, God's turning back. There may have been moments of just not aware, God not present, but I don't remember a moment of so much pain and so much loss. I certainly think there's right now in our lives with like the COVID, the pain of so many of the stories that I see and have been hearing. There are certainly moments when I'm imagining that people, those COVID moments where people are dying, a person is dying alone in a hospital when family cannot be present with them, is one of those moments where I feel like that could, I can imagine current circumstances, situations where people around me would have experienced, are experiencing that kind of abandonment.
Yeah, for me, when I was thinking about it, and like you, I've been very blessed. But there was a time, at the age of 32, when I came out and was open and honest about my sexuality, and I'd been serving a church as youth minister for almost 10 years. And when I came out, I remember feeling that God had forsaken me, but it wasn't, I realized after the fact, and sometimes you don't realize until well after things happen, but I realized that I felt that God had forsaken me because of what people were saying to me. Because I was, disfellowshipped, as the word they used was, and I was renting an apartment from someone in the church, and I came home one day and all of my things were outside. I'd been evicted because, they can have nothing to do with me until I see the error of my ways. And I really thought after all those years that God had forsaken me, had abandoned me. And it wasn't until driving down a highway in the town in South Carolina that I lived at the time, and I see this huge billboard that just says, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. And it was a new church start in town, and they met at 5 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. So I went, palms sweaty, heart racing, not knowing what I was going to experience. And I think within about 10 minutes of walking in the door, I realized that God had not forsaken me. People had forsaken me. God had not. And since then, when there are times that I find myself thinking, God, where are you? Or God, have you left me here? Or something like that. I remind myself of that sign on the side of the highway, and realize that God is still very present for me. But I know the pain of experiencing what it feels like to be forsaken by God. And it's a very lonely place. And I wasn't going through, mine was all emotional pain. Mine was not physical pain. I can't imagine Jesus experiencing both the physical and the emotional pain of this, and then feeling like God had forsaken him. And I think so often it's the people in our lives that forsake us instead of God, and just trying to remind myself of that from time to time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That's your story. That's very moving for me. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I've noticed in a lot of the sayings that Jesus said from the cross that he references the Psalms frequently. And this is no exception here. In this particular saying from the cross, Jesus quotes almost verbatim Psalm 22, the first verse in Psalm 22. Do you have any experience with that psalm, or any words of wisdom about what that psalm might have been about, or why Jesus may have used that particular one?
I didn't do as a good pastor could have done that kind of research. I kind of don't do that anymore. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm retired, man.
You're retired. That's right.
But I could, my understanding, I guess, or sense about Jesus was that he really was immersed in the scriptures and knew them well. And I would think my own experience with the Psalms is that they are tools for prayer, tools for personal kind of, and for community kind of, both praising God, but also really kind of letting it all hang out. And that psalm is an incredibly powerful one. And I think I've certainly run into that every Good Friday preparation for services or sermons, or just and been very aware of the presence of that psalm and how powerful it is, and could imagine. We've talked a little bit about what Jesus was going through, the pain of that. Imagining that psalm would have really been present in his mind and spirit, and just would have poured out right then. It was so where it seems like it expressed his own sense of abandonment. So I totally, I just, yeah, man, that's the best one you could have come up with. And I don't see him going through, okay, was it Psalm 23 or Psalm 105? Which one should I say from the cross? It just was there. I think it was deeply buried in him.
Yeah.
It came out.
Yeah. And I think, so what I found when I was reading through the Psalm and doing some research, that it is about a person who's crying out to God to save them. But what I found interesting was at the end of that Psalm, it's that person thanking God for doing so. So there's this feeling at the beginning of, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then, so it's almost like you have that feeling of being forsaken at the beginning, but then you have that feeling of resurrection at the end. But just the parallels in the Psalms and the sayings from the cross really struck me in doing this project. It's something that I didn't really notice before.
I think that's one of the huge gifts of the Psalms for us today is that they do express such a wide range of emotion, both the joy and the sense of resurrection, but also, before you get there, the dying, and the pain of that, of whatever is going on in one's life.
Yeah.
In your story, I hear a lot of dying, a lot of death, of having to of being forced to let go of the relationships. You didn't have a choice, but you talked about in the church being there for a number of years, and even where you lived and who you were, and your own understanding of who you were became clearer. But that the old man died.
Yeah, that's very true. Thanks for bringing that up. I think sometimes, and I've said this before in conversations, as people, sometimes we would like to skip Good Friday and go straight to Easter, but you can't have Easter without Good Friday.
Yeah.
And so thinking about it that way changes my perspective on a lot of things.
It's even better to go from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday.
That's true. That is true.
The whole stuff, all that garbage that went on during the week.
Yeah. It's a lot happened from Sunday to Sunday. And it's part of the story. It's part of the journey, and we shouldn't leave it out. It's important.
We can't. In terms of, and really address the reality of human life, of our lives.
So there has been, over the years, so much written about these 7 things that Jesus said from the cross, particularly this one. There's quite a bit of information out there. And it is quite a thing for Jesus to say that God has forsaken him. I mean, he's supposed to be God, or at least that is what the Christian church has claimed for centuries. Very God begotten, or very God. So it's essentially God forsaking God's self, or God's child. Or put another way, one member of the three in one, or the Trinity of God, forsaking another member of the Trinity. So at best, it's self-abandonment, and at its worst, it seems like a form of child abandonment in a way. And this has absolutely fascinated theologians for centuries. And they've all had some sort of idea, different sorts of ideas about what Jesus meant when he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? What would you say? In what ways do you think Jesus felt forsaken?
I guess as I thought about it now, I was kind of looking at it just in terms of what we have in the story of his disciples just had forsaken him, people he'd been closest to for his ministry. The this whole societal power structure had forsaken him, had condemned him to death, including the religious leaders of his own community, his own culture. So it was just kind of everything, all of the world had condemned him. And then you look at read the story about just the people in the crowd kind of laughing at him, spitting at him, challenging him. I mean, just that whole story of shame, of just total rejection. You're just, if you're who you say you are, then you've got to show the power now on the cross. You can't die. You just got to do it now. So there was just, everything was being thrown at him right then. Everything. We talked about abandonment, turning your back on it seems like almost all human relationship turned their back on him right then, except maybe the women.
Yeah. That's some of the same women that proclaimed that the resurrection had happened, Yeah. And I can't imagine that feeling. And then, for Christ to have the strength to say some other things that he said from the cross, like forgive them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how much strength would that take? And I've got to be careful because I'll get off into another saying, but that feeling of loneliness. But then I also think about God in this situation. And when I think about tragic things that have happened throughout time, even today, some of the tragic things that happen. And several years ago, I went to Oklahoma Christian University to speak, and it was after the Oklahoma City bombing, and I went with a friend, and we toured the memorial there. And so you have the memorial where the building was, and then across the street from the building, there is a huge statue of Jesus with his back turned, and he's got his his head in his hands, and it just simply says at the bottom, Jesus wept.
Wow.
And when I think about Jesus on the cross, I can almost picture, in a way, God turning and weeping at what, and God knows the whole story, right? But in that moment, even though God knows resurrection is coming, in that moment, there's sadness, it's pain. And I almost wonder if God wasn't weeping at the same time that Jesus felt this deep feeling of being forsaken by everyone, including God. that's just this image that I get in my head when I think about this particular instance in the life of Jesus.
Yeah, that's a very powerful sharing that you just did. Thank you.
Yeah, that image in Oklahoma City will be with me forever, I think, because I think sometimes when tragedies happen to us today, I often think God was the first one to weep. And I don't know, it's just powerful for me to think about God reacting in such a human way almost.
Can't quite put it the way you put it, but I was really powerfully moved last night when the president came on television and remembered and called us as a nation to grieve for the 500,000 people who have died for COVID, and his conversation about remembering and honoring, but also the deep hurt and pain and grief, recognizing that was a very powerful image as well for something that's just going on right now for us. And you think about the stories of how family members have had to abandon their family members because they couldn't be there because of COVID. I mean, just the tragic stories. I can picture God weeping for us, for the world right now.
So there are several passages of scripture that talk about God will never leave us, or God is always with us. God will never forsake us. I'll just read a few. Deuteronomy 31:6 says, "Be strong and bold, have no fear or dread of them, because it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not fail you or forsake you." Couple of verses later, Deuteronomy 31:8, "It is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not fail you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed." Joshua 1:5, "No one shall be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you." Isaiah 41:17, "When the poor and needy seek water, and there is none, and their tongue is parched with thirst, I, the Lord, will answer them. I, the God of Israel, will not forsake them." And then Hebrews 13:5-6, "Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, for he has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. So you can say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can anyone do to me?" And I have to wonder when I read those passages, particularly from the prophets and from Deuteronomy, this promise of God never leaving us or forsaking us. I have to wonder if that increased the pain that Jesus felt on the cross when he did feel like God had done just that. And I wonder if Jesus thought, well, are those not true for me? And I don't know how to go any further than that, but it's just a wondering, really.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me, I was looking, at the Deuteronomy passages and Joshua passages were the context of the pain. There was pain there, and that's one of the things we've been talking about with Jesus. Before the resurrection, there was the Good Friday, but that Moses, the leader who had been with these people for years and years and years and years, had died or was dying, about to die, when God said these things. I'm still going to be with you. And then I could imagine what it would have felt like to Joshua to be, what? I don't know. I'm taking Moses' place. Come on, man. Come on, God. And that, when you use the verse of Joshua, that was right after Moses had died. And now God, in a sense, was saying to Joshua, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to be present with you. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that the pain of loss, of death, of someone incredibly powerful and significant to that leader who was coming up then, Joshua, was there and had to be experienced. I can imagine kind of thinking about the uncertainty that, God, can I do this? As Joshua, can I lead the people with like Moses did? I'm just kind of throwing in some. Wow. So I guess what I'm trying to say in terms of the promise was not true for Jesus. Yeah, I think it was true, but the promise could not spare him of his death on the cross, and doesn't spare us the losses in our lives either when we're experiencing that kind of sense of dying, of abandonment. I can imagine you felt some of that, the depth of some real incredible pain when you describe your coming out time, especially in the context of being a pastor, a youth pastor in a church, and having the church respond to you that way. And people you had trusted and worked with and helped you have housing, treating you that way. Come on. There had to be incredible pain in that for you.
Yeah. And there was, but I think there was also, and this is what I have to remind myself of too, there was an incredible amount of growth that happened for me during that time too. And I think while temporarily it hindered my relationship with God, in the end, it made it even stronger, I think, in a lot of ways. Because especially once I realized that it was not God that had forsaken me, it was people that had forsaken me. That changed my whole thinking. And I think about Jesus on the cross. He'd been saying, that this was going to happen. He even said the resurrection was going to happen. Yet I find it very disturbing that there was no one there waiting for the resurrection to happen 3 days later, because he said all this time it's going to happen. But just this feeling of, even though he knew the story and that the resurrection was coming, just what a human feeling he felt during this time when everyone, like you said earlier, had abandoned them, and including God. So, and I do think I know that the promise was true for Jesus, and I don't think Jesus didn't think that promise was true for him when he was on the cross and when he said that. But I will say, as a human being, sometimes it's hard to see that when you're going through the fire and the trial that you're going through at the time. It's hard to see the promises are true. And to kind of wrap it up here, thinking about Jesus being forsaken by God it's certainly troubling. And we don't like thinking about our God being the kind of God who would forsake anyone, much less his own faithful child. But a lot of people also find comfort and hope in this very transparent moment in the life of Jesus when he cries out to God. I think they find comfort in it because it's relatable. For many people, we can think of times when we felt like if God wasn't, maybe had not forsaken us, but that God was distant. God wasn't actually in the moment. So it's relatable for us to feel that way. Many people even say that this moment is crucial to understanding the good news of Jesus Christ, understanding what happens on the cross for us as followers. Do you find comfort or hope in this moment? And if so, where is the comfort for you in this moment?
I would say yes, because I guess for me it's true. It's a deeply human truth that the scriptures that God knows, in terms of the human experience, that this pain and abandonment and a sense of loss, heavy, intense loss, is real. It's a real part of life, and so I think it's comforting to know that, and to see that Jesus really went into the depths of the pain of the loss. It wasn't just a Hollywood show, in a way.
Yeah.
I'm going to hang there, but I'm not going to feel the pain. I'm God, and there's no pain here. But that Jesus really encountered the depth, the very depth of that pain, of the rejection, of the pain, as you said, the physical pain. I'm pointing to nails in his hands, and in the rest of his different parts of his body. It was just unbelievable pain.
I find comfort in it as well. And I think one of the reasons that I find comfort in it is because it was very human for Jesus to feel that way. But it also gives me comfort for the times in my life when I have wanted to cry out, God, where are you?
Mm-hmm.
God's own son asks the same question. So if God could handle God's son and asking that question, then God can certainly handle me asking the question also. I find it very comforting. There's a lot of things in the life of Christ that make him very relatable to me. This is one of those, I think, really relatable moments in the life of Christ, in this intense agony and pain and loneliness that he was feeling. He felt like God was not there, and he asked, God, why have you abandoned me in my time of need?
And yet, in a way, not I don't mean and yet, but that could be a prayer. And I think that psalm is a prayer of lament, of pain. And I think there are other psalms that are that way, and that those are legitimate, real prayers that we've actually been given as models. In the past, I've heard people say, well, I can't say that to God. I shouldn't talk to God that way. And I think this just anything that you need to share with God, any pain, any level of pain is there. It's laid out there at this moment for Jesus on the cross. I don't think Jesus was thinking about being a good model for the rest of us when he was doing that.
Right.
But I do think that gives, it's hugely permission giving to all of us in those moments of just total sense of abandonment, of being forsaken by God. That God can hear those prayers, and God can take those prayers. God's not going to say, "Oh, you can't talk to me that way," and push us away. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
God's going to hear that prayer. And I don't know. I can see God cry. I can see God's tears when God received that prayer, heard that prayer from the cross.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Were you there?